Are you sure you still want to do this?
Don't worry, we'll be fine.
You know, if someone finds out I was a part of this, I could lose my job.
We're fine. Let's make sure the cameras on standby.
Look, man, I'm serious. The police can get involved, we can all get arrested, and I'm not going to jail for something like this. I'm not...
My God, would you shut? Get behind the camera. Shut the hell up. Silence. No one's gonna care.
Well, no one's even going to care. Why are we even doing this?
Because why the hell not?
Hi, Max Headroom here with... What I'm talking about, and you're not, is that more people prefer the new refreshing taste of Coke over Pepsi. Sweating? It's true. More people are, as we Cokeologists say, catching the wave. Catch it if you can. Catch the wave. Coke.
In the 1980s, there was one character who was on TV screens everywhere, and his name was Max Headroom.
Hi, this is Max Headroom, live down under. Normally I'd say sunglasses are ostentatious. This is Max Headroom, Perk 23, brought to you by... You certainly... No.
Good morning, class. Psychology. The study of good taste.
Max Headroom was a character created to defy the system, someone who was meant to go against the norm, and who humorously voiced his distaste for the men behind the curtain, and the way they use the media to manipulate the masses.
Am I dreaming?
Where am I?
Making his debut in a 1984 TV movie for Britain's Channel 4, Max soon made his way out west, where he would find a new audience in an entirely different nation.
Hi, Max Headroom here with...
And America loved him. He was appearing on late-night talk shows.
There's Max right there.
Interviewing celebrities.
You have played some pretty extreme parts, big fella, haven't you? Which was your favorite?
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner?
And most famously, being the face of the New Coke.
For those of you too young to remember, the New Coke was Coca-Cola's way of rebranding itself for a younger, hipper generation. A generation that had moved on from mom and pop's, well, pop.
A generation that had taken to drinking Pepsi in lieu of Coke.
Pepsi had quickly become the cola for the cool kids, the soft drink of choice for your favorite rock and pop stars. After all, Pepsi was a choice of a new generation.
Recently, an independent research firm ran a taste test between Coke and Pepsi. And the taste more people chose was the taste of Coca-Cola.
Coke, catch the wave.
Max Headroom premieres tomorrow night.
To combat this, Coke sought help from a certain artificially intelligent wise guy.
Thank you, but hey, let's try it.
Coca-Cola made the risky decision to change both their image and their secret formula, in the hopes of beating Pepsi at their own game. Coke genuinely thought that they would come out on top at the end of the Cola Wars.
I could have blocked that shot.
Sure, Mac.
In what was meant to be a brand new era for Coke, ultimately was a failure. Despite this, Max Headroom would forever be cemented as one of the strangest, craziest, and funniest characters to ever come out of the 1980s.
It's no secret the 1980s was a monumental era for TV, and especially commercials. With all this commercialism flooding television, it was only a matter of time before someone would set out to disrupt popular culture by using TV against itself.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission.
The idea of unknown outsiders intruding in our regularly scheduled broadcast has been a popular trope in fiction since the first golden age of television. But it's doubtful that anyone thought this would be possible in the real world.
Oh, but how wrong they were. One of the first known cases of signal intrusion happened on the evening of November 26, 1977. Unknown individuals posed as space aliens and broadcast a message over the nightly news in southern England. They brought a message not of world domination, but of world peace. There was no video, however, only audio.
This is the voice of Allah, representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, speaking to you. For many years you have seen us as lights in the skies. We speak to you with peace and wisdom as we have done to your brothers and sisters all over this, your planet Earth.
Once their 5-minute intrusion was completed, these English-accented space aliens left this planet for good.
Criminal Division is looking into a weekend incident in which someone suddenly interrupted a home box office movie on cable.
Jumping forward 9 years, John R. McDougal, a frustrated satellite salesman and TV station engineer, jammed the HBO broadcast of the 1985 film The Falcon and the Snowman with his own passive-aggressive opinion regarding the costly price for cable subscriptions. Although no one initially suspected McDougal, he became riddled with guilt and turned himself in.
32 minutes past midnight Sunday morning, HBO viewers east of the Mississippi suddenly had their movie, The Falcon and the Snowman, interrupted with this silent message printed over color bars. Good evening, HBO, from Captain Midnight. $12.95 a month? No way. Showtime movie channel, beware. An objection to the price HBO is charging dish owners for access to its recently scrambled programs.
Whether McDougal realized it or not, his inept crime would ultimately serve as a blueprint for any wannabe hijacker out there looking to introduce a little anarchy to the airwaves.
Spokesmen at the HBO Broadcast Center in Long Island are not saying how they got control of their signal back from the intruder, who may never be caught. HBO executives decided not to comment in front of news cameras because they don't want to project this as only an HBO problem. They say this is a relatively minor case of a new type of electronic jamming which could threaten several sectors of our society.
Because of the McDougal incident, it was made known that one could create such an impact in the lives of many by invading the homes of an entire city in one night, even if only for a few minutes.
A few minutes is all you need, really.
The first attempt took place on TV station WGN during the nightly news. Hijackers were busy setting up their own portable TV station up on a rooftop somewhere, away from the public eye, but in close enough proximity to the transmitters at WGN. Dan Roan was covering the Chicago Bears' victory over the Detroit Lions. Everyone in the Windy City would be tuned in. The transmission would be very hard to miss.
15 to the 10 to the 5, McMahon and McKinnon, 14-0 Bears. Then the defense, which hadn't put up a sack in 12 quarters, finally did. Oh, if you're wondering what's happened, so am I. Actually, the computer that we have.
The first attempt was not a success. The engineers at WGN acted quickly and were able to take their signal back from the hijackers, spoiling their fun.
Right. You liked it so much that you really planned that, didn't you?
Sure I did.
The hijackers, however, were not quite ready to give up just yet.
Just 2 hours later, the hijackers, determined now more than ever to get their show on the air, set their sights on WTTW, Chicago's very own PBS affiliate. But where WGN had a number of engineers on duty to put a stop to the first incident, the engineers at WTTW had gone home for the evening. Leaving the station vulnerable for a longer transmission override. Exactly what the video pirates were hoping for.
The following program contains material which may be considered adult in nature. Discretion should be used in deciding whether to view this program.
You should hook up with the old ones of your tribe. That is the only way to learn.
I'll get you a hot drink, miss.
I've done some dry clothing.
Because he's a freaking nerd. I think I've got chicks worse than freaking oh, Jesus. That's the way. I still see the X. Oh, my files. Oh, I guess they're giant masterpiece for all the greatest world newspaper nerds. My brother is wearing the other one. But it's dirty. That's what you get for my time. Oh, they're coming to get me.
And just like that, the hijackers vanished into the night, never to be seen or heard from again. Their broadcast would be the only trace of evidence they would ever leave behind.
Hijackers had done their job well. While they didn't exactly reach the amount of viewers they originally intended on WGN, if you were unlucky enough to be watching PBS later that night and saw it, by God, did you see it?
Breaking and entering took on a whole new meaning when Max infiltrated the TV sets of countless Chicago homes. But who was the man behind the mask? The mind behind the madness? And while an entire city was looking at their screens in utter shock, who was looking back?
Last night, someone broke into regular programming here on Channel 9 and on Chicago's public broadcasting station. As Larry Roderick reports, the first interruption took place during last night's 9 o'clock news.
Sports anchor Dan Rowan had just started his Sunday night Bears report when the screen suddenly went black, then came back on with a new unruly presence, a man wearing a Max Headroom mask. We had been taken over by a video pirate.
Another one is on tonight, this one for the video pirates, who managed to scramble Chicago airwaves. The pirates interrupted WGN and WTTW programming with a show of their own.
Video pirate who raided 2 television broadcasts last night first hit WGN. The pirate mimicked the Max Headroom character that you see on TV.
In Chicago television stations, someone using sophisticated equipment managed to briefly and illegally override broadcast signals on WGN TV and WTTW. Jack Connolly reports now that both incidents are under investigation.
Even in a medium that is no stranger to bizarre moments, these were truly bizarre. Starting first on WGN TV at 9:14 Sunday night during a sportscast.
12 quarters finally did. But Channel 9 wasn't alone in its Max Headroom appearance. There was even a longer episode on Channel 11, public broadcasting.
About 2 hours later, the video pirate struck again. This time, the target was a science fiction broadcast on PBS affiliate WTTW.
Channel 11's Doctor Who was unexpectedly knocked off the TV screen last night by a broadcast pirate disguised as Max Headroom. The wacky and at times perverse TV surprise came shortly after 11 o'clock, lasting about a minute and a half. The same thing happened at WGN's 9 o'clock news broadcast earlier in the evening.
By this time, the pirate had managed to insert audio as well, along with a display of a marital aid and a portion of his or her anatomy. It generated hundreds of calls.
It annoyed some viewers.
No, I just thought it would be just a slight mess up, but that in the middle of the tape, it's going to be... You're going to have to tape over it.
Angered others.
Somebody wants to get attention, what do? They go break into a television broadcast. Just to get attention, like throwing a brick through your window, so to speak.
I got so upset that I wanted to bust the TV set. I really did.
Well, some thought it was a lot of fun. So what did you think about the whole thing?
Very, very funny.
The Max look-alike pitched a soft drink, then performed a series of antics that station officials found less than humorous before the pirate himself pulled the plug.
Fortunately, it was a self-destruct mechanism. It was beyond our control. We now have already implemented steps whereby we could take something like that off the air immediately if it were to occur again. It did, of its own volition, go off the air, as I say, after about a minute and a half.
The FCC says the pirates were able to use stronger microwave signals to override the television signals which are transmitted from the Hancock and Sears towers. The FCC says the wise guys who pulled off this latest stunt are in very big trouble.
The incidents are now under investigation by the FCC and the FBI.
But the odds, I'd say, if a guy continues to involve himself, either sporadically or continuously, it's very great that we will determine who it is.
All early evidence points to someone with a broadcasting background.
Take some pretty sophisticated microwave equipment operating in the broadcast auxiliary frequency bands.
Well, this is not just anybody off the street. He has to have an electronic expertise of some level, right?
Yes, he does. It takes very sophisticated equipment to do this at a significant power level. So this isn't something that just anyone would be able to accomplish. Someone wants to get into your house, they can find a way to do that. And I guess likewise, if someone wants to interfere with your signal, they can find a way to do that.
Meanwhile, Channel 9 engineers say they have taken steps to prevent further appearances of the mock Max. It may seem rather humorous, but there is more to it than that.
For when this person is caught, he or she will face both civil and criminal penalties.
This is Larry Roderick, WGN News.
Masks are unsettling. Since the beginning of time, masks have been used as a form of protection. Protection in war. Protection from disease. And protection of identity. Our identity is arguably the most important thing about us. Because it literally is us. But masks can also be theatrical, meant to leave a lasting impression. We utilize masks for Halloween, for stage plays. Some cultures even use them for celebrations. But sometimes masks can be used to leave a darker impression. As I said, in the past, masks were utilized by warriors to instill fear in the opposing side. In horror movies, serial killers often wear them to create the same effect. Although there are many different uses for masks, the most common reaction to them, however, is fear. Masks create a sort of paradox, where one has a face, yet no face. We find them eerie because masks don't allow us to see the motives of the person underneath them. With a mask, it is hard to determine if a person is good or bad. Is this person completely docile? Or is that person going to harm me? We don't know. We fear what we don't understand, what our minds cannot pinpoint, what doesn't fully make sense. Masks instill that fear. Fear of the unknown.
Deliberately overriding a TV signal was, and still is, a punishable federal offense. For his role in the Captain Midnight signal hijack a year earlier, John R. McDougal was fined over $5,000 and served 12 months probation in lieu of jail time. The severity of Max's broadcast was enough that an official investigation was launched by both the FCC and the FBI.
Spearheading the investigation was a man by the name of Dr. Michael Marcus, who at the time was the Assistant Chief of Field Operations for the FCC.
He theorized that the signal jammers were situated somewhere on the north or northwestern side of the downtown area, where they would be in fairly close proximity of both the Sears Tower and John Hancock Center transmitters. Most likely from the trajectory of a nearby rooftop.
Meanwhile, the feds were zeroing in on finding the identities of Max and his accomplices by any means necessary.
Photo lab technicians at the FBI began to develop blown-up prints from the incident in the hopes of identifying either the masked man or his presumably female accomplice.
The FBI were only able to get these photos by acquiring them from still images ripped from VHS tapes. VHS tapes that were donated by local Chicago citizens to aid in the search to find Max.
Dr. Marcus, who could only do so much from his home in Washington, D.C., was dependent on the Chicago team to do the necessary footwork around the city. Unfortunately for him, the FCC's representatives back in Chicago just weren't willing to expend the time or the resources to look deeper into the case, let alone finding a possible suspect. Ultimately, there just wasn't enough for the FCC or the feds to go on. No real evidence, no real suspects, and no real threat either.
The photographs were of not much use either, as they revealed virtually nothing about the people responsible or even a possible filming location. With no further developments in the case, both the FCC and the FBI eventually lost interest, and with them, the general public. The event, which at first inspired such shock and annoyance, would go on to become a joke within the following weeks.
Finally tonight, I guess I have to apologize for what's been happening the last couple of minutes. It's obvious that Chet Kopic's been jamming my sportscast and TV.
Did you see the FCC has already said they're going to analyze these signals and go right to the source and just put this guy out of business?
Right across the hall.
Those are the people who spent 10 years trying to make Steve Dahl talk nice, and they're going to shut this guy down?
Yeah, no way.
Jumping forward nearly a decade and a half, the Max Headroom incident would find new life on the World Wide Web. Thanks largely in part to websites like fuzzymemories.tv and the then fairly new video hosting site YouTube.
The once obscure event would explode into a phenomenon, being discussed and dissected in blog posts, articles, podcasts, and even on popular YouTube talk shows.
The hijackers could not have foreseen in 1987 the audience they would eventually have some 30 years later. With this newfound interest, web users everywhere began to pick up where Dr. Marcus left off and launched their own investigations into the still unsolved case.
It wasn't before long that they had narrowed down some possible suspects.
My theory is that Max is the son of an executive for one of the TV stations. This would explain how he had access to the equipment needed to pull off the hijacking.
Max is now a wealthy cattle rancher living somewhere in rural Texas with ties to the music industry, if I remember correctly.
I think the guy who made the Chase and John videos is really behind the Max Headroom incident. They both have a similar fucked up sense of humor and weird use of masks and voice changing special effects.
Rumor has it they already caught the real culprit behind the hijacking and just kept quiet all these years. Supposedly the guy in the Max mask passed away sometime around 2005.
I believe I know who is behind the Max Headroom incident.
In the year 2010, a Reddit user by the name of Bowie Pogue authored a lengthy post claiming the two former acquaintances of his just may have been the very people behind the now infamous hijacking. By his account, the suspects, identified solely by the initials of J and K so as to protect their identities, were a pair of brothers who were both active members of the local computer and phone hacking scene in 1980 Chicago, the latter often referred to as freaking. Kay lived with his girlfriend and one other roomie at a shared apartment in LaGrange, Illinois. His older brother Jay was severely autistic, and so his time was split between living with his parents and being looked after by Kay. When the brothers weren't using the apartment for their shared hobby, they would host the occasional house party or two. It was during one of these parties that Pogue claims to have overheard the brothers talking about planning something big over the weekend. Later that night at a nearby Pizza Hut, Pogue asked the brothers what exactly they meant about something big. To which someone, presumably Kay, replied, "Just watch Channel 11 later tonight." It was the evening of November 22nd, 1987. Pogue states that while he did in fact witness the hijacking on WTTW that same night, he had forgotten about his earlier conversation with the brothers at the Pizza Hut, and simply failed to make a connection between the two events. His initial belief at the time was that Kay was the cameraman, the brother as mentioned by Max. Kay's girlfriend was the woman who performed the infamous spanking, and ultimately that Jay was Max himself. His reasons being that Jay had a rather warped, lowbrow sense of humor and scattered train of thought much like that displayed by Max in the video. This theory would garner much attention on the web from both hopeful believers and doubtful skeptics. Could these mystery brothers really be the mad geniuses behind the legendary hijacking? Well, no. After spending years of investigation into the case of Rick Klein, founder of Fuzzy Memories Museum of Classic Chicago TV and owner of the original Max broadcast, Pogue released an update in 2014 clearing his former friends of any part in the hijacking. So it seems that the real Max would evade capture yet again. So our questionnaire isn't really about who you think did it.
Yeah, because we didn't want you. We wanted to interview you for this, but I mean, we figured like you've heard this to death. So many comments, so many people just asking like the same things and stuff, and it's got to be tiresome, I bet.
Yeah, well, it becomes a part of you after a while.
What was your reaction the first time you saw it?
Well, when I saw it, this was just in the months leading up to starting Oddity Archive, and so I had lost my job in April of 2012, and I just kind of retreated into my own little world of not just nostalgia, but nostalgic terrors, I guess you could say. Things that freaked me out: emergency broadcast system, clowns. On the one hand, it was just another one of those things, just seeing if I could, I guess, get my own reaction, but also this fascination because the techie end of it came in, and I'm thinking, okay, how did they pull this off? I went looking around to see if anybody had really researched it yet at that point, and it didn't seem like it, so that became the first episode of Oddity Archive. Almost immediately after it came out, I was contacted by a guy named Rick Klein, who was the guy that taped it off of WTTW back then. We actually talked on the phone for quite some time, just in the days after that episode came out, and he kind of brought me along for the ride for several years after. And what you saw and what I saw on YouTube years ago was actually ripped from his site.
Why do you think the Max Headroom incident, sort of became the internet phenomenon that it did compared to the other signal intrusions that happened, like Captain Midnight and Vrillon, or even the recent zombie hoax?
I've come to believe, as far as its second life on the internet, that I think it's just rebellion. I think people always want to kind of buck the system, even if they would never act on it in a million years. And here's this group of probably 3 people, is my estimate, that actually went as far as to come up with the gear and find a place within the line of sight of transmitters and actually cut in on a broadcast. I think that is, like I said, it just brings out that bit of, oh man, I wish I could do that. I wish I could stick it to the man. The character of Max Headroom was a media troll. If you've seen episodes of the old Max Headroom series, it was subverting the media. But I think that was kind of their, I guess you could say, artistic statement, to borrow from this science fiction concept of this artificial character. I think there was at least a little bit of an agenda. I think it was at least I wouldn't say an inside job, but maybe peripherally somehow. Somebody had an axe to grind. Otherwise, they wouldn't be dropping all those WGN references in there. And, of course, whoever did it had apparently lived in Chicago forever and ever, dropping references to Clutch Cargo, which hadn't been on WGN for at least a decade prior to the hijacking. So,
another question I had, and this one more pertains to the actual, case a little bit, and I feel like it doesn't really get asked a lot. And just to clarify, I'm not like coming at the FCC about this, because I'm pretty sure they had a good reason for this, but do you think it's possible that the FCC actually does perhaps have an idea who perpetrated the hijacking and are just kind of keeping quiet about it because they didn't want people to follow, copycat hijackers to follow suit?
From what I've seen of the documents from that time period, if they had any real suspects, they would have gone to them. Of course, they were trying to dissuade anybody from doing that. I mean, the news segments from immediately after the hijacking ferret that out pretty well. And also, there wasn't so much in the way of encryption in broadcasting back then. I think it's part of the reason why there is now. But in 1987, I don't think many people had thought about it. There's a thing called triangulation in broadcasting, which I think they're a little more efficient with today. And there's a reason why the Max Headroom incident only runs, I think, 90 seconds. It's because after a point, you can trace the signal eventually. So somebody knew what they were doing on that front. They knew just how long to leave it.
Do you think we'll ever hear from any of the video pirates coming forward in our lifetime?
I don't think so. I'd imagine at this point in their lives, assuming that all of them are still alive, they'd probably be more worried about their own personal security at this point. So I just really don't foresee it. I think there'd just be enough nuts out there that they would just hound them.
True.
Hound them for probably years on end. And try and find where they lived. It's not even expectations, it's just some people have taken it so far, and it's one of the reasons I've kind of backed out of it, because people have just keep going with these conspiracy theories. I think it would cause a lot more problems than it would solve for them to step forward.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to let us interview you on a subject that's, you're probably sick of hearing, honestly.
Don't worry about it. Let me know if you need anything else, if I can help you.
Okay, great. All right, well, you have a great night. Thanks, Ben. Thank you.
Yeah, night, guys.
Good night. The Max Headroom hijacking incident remains one of the strangest occurrences ever to take place in the history of television. And while it's not likely that we're ever going to actually find out who the people responsible for it were,
from our research and investigation, there are a few things that we can assume and some things that we know for sure.
One thing that has been made abundantly clear throughout our investigation is this: that either some or all of the people responsible for this hijacking had to have had at least some sort of background in either broadcasting, video and audio engineering, or media production in general.
It is true in the 1980s that people were getting home video cameras as more of a normalcy in their households.
Actually being able to edit footage shot with said cameras was a whole other matter all its own. The reason I bring this up is that towards the end of the Max Headroom hijacking incident, there is a very noticeable cut between Max's glove monologue as well as the infamous spanking scene. The cut does not appear to have been done in camera, so I'm going to assume that prior to the airing of the video, they took the tape to an editing suite and cut it down from its original length.
Now, in regards to how it was filmed, this is how we think it was done. We think it was done in a garage or warehouse of some form late at night. We think this because of the way the lighting looks, and also the fact that they had access to the corrugated metal to pretend to be the background from the Max Headroom commercials. It most likely had to be a team of at least 3 people. One to operate the camera, a most likely female cohort that was dressed in what most people assume to be a French maid outfit, but we think it is a German barmaid outfit. Those from Chicago would know in the 1980s, there were German and Polish festivals that would happen around the time that the incident took place.
So it's not hard to believe that the pirates could have snagged one of these costumes following the festivities from a nearby costume shop or something like that.
And finally, Max himself. We do believe that there were probably more, but at the very least, there were 3.
One thing that is very noticeable about the Max Headroom incident is the quality of the audio, or lack thereof. It's all extremely garbled and staticky and sounds like something out of a nightmare. Nowadays, it's very easy to add a sort of digital distortion sound using software, but in the 1980s, everything was hardware. You could actually produce effects like that using something like, say, an effects pedal or a ring modulator. So that about covers the actual filming of the video, but what about the broadcasting of it? Well, Dr. Michael Marcus himself had a theory. In an interview with Vice magazine, Marcus speculated that they could have gotten their hands on some used ham radio parts for a fraction of the usual cost.
Throughout the video, Max makes several blatant references to WGN, local TV personalities,
Get out the salami and cheese, mama. This ball game is over.
and 1980s pop culture itself.
Coke. He begins his surreal monologue by calling Chuck Swirsky a quote-unquote freaking liberal. For those too young to remember, Chuck Swirsky was the announcer for the Chicago Bulls in the 1980s.
Max then picks up a Pepsi can and says the new Coke's catchphrase, "catch the wave," before tossing it off camera. So the fact that Max holds up a Pepsi can while uttering Coke's catchphrase shows that he is willing to even mock the character in which he is impersonating.
Shortly thereafter, Max begins to hum the theme song to Clutch Cargo, a somewhat popular kids adventure series that was created in the 1950s and 60s but was being aired in rerun form on WGN during the 1970s. This confirms that Max has been a long-time Chicago native. This evidence is supported by the fact that Max shortly thereafter says, "Your love is fading." For those of you familiar with the Chicago soul scene, this is a reference to the song by Lou Pride, which was popular in the 1960s. So again, this kind of gives us a roundabout to how long Max had lived in Chicago and maybe even to his possible age.
Following this, he makes a more direct WGN reference, stating that he has just made a giant masterpiece for all the greatest world newspaper nerds. Which greatest world newspaper is a butchering of world's greatest newspaper, which is what WGN stands for, which was owned by the Chicago Tribune, the world's greatest newspaper. So most likely this was all done as one of the first acts of trolling, specifically to WGN.
Could this mean that Max was a former employee of WGN and was in some way wronged or frustrated with the company? Maybe he was from a rival station?
Or maybe he was just someone that really didn't like WGN.
I was first made aware of the Max Headroom hijacking incident in 2007. YouTube was a fairly new website, and I was using it around this time to look at old commercials, specifically those from the 1980s featuring Max Headroom. So it was quite on accident that I stumbled upon the hijacking video. The 13-year-old me that saw this video, admittedly, I was actually pretty creeped out by the video when I first saw it. Something about the really lo-fi horror movie quality of it, the grotesque rubber mask, the garbled, staticky audio. Initially, I thought it was some sort of homemade internet hoax, but then I started to look deeper into it and found out that this event was actually real. I couldn't believe it. It was like I had stumbled upon some program that was not meant for the public's eyes. But even stronger than my feelings of shock and confusion were my feelings of intrigue. And evidently I wasn't the only one. But who really was Max?
Well, that's just it. Do we want to know? Like deep down, do we truly want to know? If Max came out tomorrow and let the world know that he was behind the incident, would we feel satisfied at all? Or would we be disappointed? Max is just some other guy, some average Joe. I just did this one weird thing one night, got away with it, and never spoke of it again. And that's most likely the case. But because we don't have that, he is forever immortalized in this mystery. See, I think we like the unknown. As much as we love seeing what's behind the curtain, sometimes we like to leave the curtain alone. Maybe the unknown is somewhat more interesting in a way. I think the unknown is why we're even talking about this in the first place. Max most likely will forever remain unknown. That much is for sure.
So, I guess one final question remains. Where is he now?
Does the man behind Max look back on this day fondly? That he and his accomplices will never be caught. Or is he ashamed by what he's done? And that this whole crazy act didn't fade away into obscurity like he wanted it to? Does he constantly worry that one day the whole world will know that it was him who was behind the mask?
Or maybe he doesn't even care at all. And those fateful Chicago nights are now just distant, fuzzy memories. A blur of pixels and noise, like something recorded to old, worn videotape. Viewed once and then forgotten. And maybe the events of that night mean more to us than they ever did to him.
Whoever Max was, or is, he still walks these streets. The same streets that you and I walk. We might even pass him and never even know he was there. He is truly invisible. The events of that night in the windy city of Chicago are still being talked about to this day, and no doubt will be for years to come. Far long after he himself is gone. And whether he wants it to or not, the Max Headroom hijacking incident has taken on a life of its very own, and it's beyond his control. Max got away from us that night, but in a way, he himself is also trapped, confined to a mystery of his own making. Max will forever be immortalized as the man who stole the airwaves, laughed in the face of an entire city, and disappeared into the night.
is truly bizarre.
Hey, Chaz, slow down. Chaz. Not yet. No. It's been a great show. We're sorry that it's through. Goodbye is such a sad word. So let's just say adieu. I knew that you'd all love me from the very start, 'cause I love myself from the bottom of my liver spleen, heart. I know I'm impossible, I have my ups and downs. Forgive me, of course you will. I'm so good to have around. True genius must have its flaw. You see, I'm rumbustious, I'm devil-may-care, I'm just a swagger, swagger. Me. It's been a great show. I'm never going to forget how I've made you laugh, I've made you cry, and even here and there put you right on a few things. And I honestly believe that between us we've shared something very, very special. Something no one can ever take away. But always remember, in a show like ours, there's nobody more important than me. And now, they can bring the curtain down. I know you're going to keep me in your hearts through the years. Can I just say thank you for all the laughs and all the tears. And one thing more. Now it's time for me to go. It's been a great show. And one thing more. Now it's time for me to go. I just want to say, it's been a great, I love you all, I really do, great, good night, God bless, have a safe journey, show.